A good theory's strength is found in its power to make accurate predictions. Darwin wrote a tentative "I think" next to a primitive sketch of the tree of life. But not long after him, Haeckel produced a very elaborate tree. One would expect genetics to reveal the same relationships between organisms that were seen in those early trees. But is that really the case? Phylogenetics is an essential part of evolution theory because the central concept of evolution is that all living organisms can ultimately trace their ancestry to the last universal common ancestor, the famous Luca. Now, before the development of genetics and molecular biology, phylogenetic trees were developed by using anatomical similarities. As early as 1866, Haeckel's detailed trees made news, thus gaining a lot of popularity. Even Charles Darwin embraced the idea. In the first edition of On the Origin of Species, Darwin wrote, "The affinities of all the beings on the same class have sometimes been represented by a great tree. I believe this simile largely speaks the truth." It would be then a reasonable expectation that as scientists started decoding genomes and understanding the inner workings of cells, that these early relationships would be confirmed to be true. Instead, a much more diverse picture emerged. Worse, it didn't even look like the anticipated tree of life. Instead of a neat, branching, single tree of life, we have a web made up of multiple shoots that appear to originate independently of each other. In other words, no root system leads exclusively to Luca. This can also be clearly illustrated in the Cambrian explosion, where all major phyla of life appear suddenly in the fossil record. The relationships between these shoots do not follow a vertical inheritance pattern, meaning no pattern of ancestor to descendant branch splitting is observed. And even some of the biggest names in evolutionary biology agree with this new outlook. For example, Carl Woese, the discoverer of archaea, said, "The tree of life is not something that exists in nature. It's a human construct." W.4 Doolittle, who studied horizontal gene transfer, bluntly declared, "The tree of life is dead." David Quammen summed it up nicely. "The tree of life has turned into a bush and now into a tangled web." Finally, Eugene Koonin, another famous evolutionary biologist, took it even further. The concept of a single tree of life based on a universal molecular phylogeny has to be abandoned. Horizontal gene transfer is often invoked to explain this discrepancy. It works when an organism receives some genetic material from another organism, such as when bacteria exchange small portions of DNA in a process called conjugation. While this phenomenon is common in bacteria and archaea, it happens far less frequently in eukaryotes, and thus is not sufficient to explain the evolution of this group of organisms. It's like claiming that eating dragon fruit is the key to muscle growth for bodybuilders, while also recognizing that very few athletes actually consume this fruit. Now, let's consider the alternative: common design. Rather than trying to force all these tangled connections into a tree, maybe the better explanation is that life was intentionally designed, like a master artist creating different pieces with a shared style or blueprint. It's like looking at various buildings in a city and realizing they all share the same architectural features, not because they are directly related, but because they were designed using the same architectural principles. If we accept the idea of common design, we can stop stressing about untangling the mess of life's tree and instead start focusing on the real tree of life. In this view, the true designer is Jesus, the creator of all life on earth and the one who offers eternal life.